Thank you for waiting. All right, we're going to get into a chapter that's going to be more like psychology, I think, than what we've covered for the most part so far. I really think the second half of the course is where we really get into the meat of psychology and a lot of the things that you kind of expect when you're taking a course in it for the first time. Some of y'all had it during high school. So this won't be so strange the way it's gone so far. But we're going to talk about the theories of personality. Okay, Ashley, I got you. First, I got to find your name. And I got you.
Is this chapter?
Chapter 10.
Okay.
We jumped over some. We're going to talk about the theories of personality. What makes you the person you are? There's a classic old 50s rock song talk about because you've got personality. And so that's where we're going to find out what your personality is, why it is, what makes you the human being that you are today. We got lots of theories about this. Some of them are very unusual, especially the first one. Some of them make me look normal or sound normal, except for when I'm trying to explain these with a straight face. But they have different viewpoints. They have different angles that they come from. And so there's like three basic questions that kind of have to be worked with. Is your personality innate? Is it formed more by your genes, or is it learned? Is it a product of your environment? Are the things that you go through in childhood really that important? How much do they affect you? What do your genes give you? We even talked a little bit about that in developmental chapter. Back in chapter 3, we talked about that, taking those children, testing a facet of their personality by giving them a little mobile, and how they reacted to that kind of was a clue as to the kind of personality they would have later on in life. Okay, so we're down to, is it nature versus nurture? How much is nature? How much is nurture? I think most of us feel like there's a percentage of each. Just what the percentage is, it'd probably be hard to pin down exactly, and maybe it varies from individual to individual. Maybe for some people, it's like 60-40, 75-25. Maybe it's 50-50, and that can go in either direction. So depending on maybe what you go through, how strong your genes are, if they're dominant or recessive genes. So there could be a lot of factors in that particular question. Okay. Is your personality conscious or is it unconscious? And by that, I don't mean, being unconscious like we talked about in the consciousness chapter, but how aware are you of the factors that make you what you are? Okay, are there just internal factors, or are there things that you can pinpoint? I grew up in this atmosphere. I grew up in this neighborhood, this school district that have a lot to do with who I am. Are there things that I chose to be that influenced me? And I said, I want to be like that. How important is that versus the things that may have happened to you that you can't remember, say in those first 3 years of your life? That how important are those? Did they change you? Okay, so this is more about awareness of who you are and why you are. All right, so we're going to be looking at the internal factors versus external factors. These are going to be important considerations throughout everything we're about to talk about in this chapter. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to start with the first one here. Take it off direct message to everyone in meeting. We're going to talk about the psychodynamic. But spell it right. Is that spelled right? Yeah. You'd think after all these years I'd know how to spell it. And this is the one that started everything off. All the theories of personality we have pretty much started here. All of this was written up by this gentleman, and I use that term loosely, named Freud, Sigmund Freud. Very interesting guy. I mean, I got to admit, um, Freud was a doctor who treated nervous conditions, but he he ran into a bit of a scandal. He back when it was legal, he would prescribe cocaine for people, and this is like late 19th century Europe. He was Austrian, and he got a fellow doctor addicted to it, which ended up breaking up the guy's family. And Freud was it was a scandal in those days. But about that same time, he started studying. He got interested in working with this French guy named Mesmer. If you've ever heard the term mesmerized, it comes from this guy's name. This guy was working with hypnosis. I believe I have mentioned this earlier in the term. And by going through the about 30 cases of upper middle class Viennese women who had these strange problems with what they call hysterical paralysis. And it would be a kind of paralysis that couldn't be explained by the structure of our nerves, which they even understood back then. It would be the paralysis of a whole hand. The problem is the way your nerves work is you've got two sets of nerves coming down to control your hands. And one of them comes down and controls, I believe it's the index finger and the thumb. And the other one comes down and controls the other three fingers, or maybe the middle finger goes with the first one, I forget on that. But bottom line is, just to have the hand go paralyzed, completely numb or whatever is physiologically not possible. And yet this is what was happening. So the idea became is it's something unconscious is going on within these women's brains, their consciousness or whatever, that's causing this phenomena to override the physical possibility. And so this is what Freud got very interested in this. And so he came up with, by just studying these 30 women, he came up with his very interesting, very imaginative theory of personality. And for Freud, unconscious is the key. You're not aware of what made you who you are. That is real important here. What you really feel only comes out occasionally. Your consciousness is dealing with reality, and yet the unconscious is what the key is to who you are. And it only comes out occasionally. Little things come out that only a trained psychoanalyst is capable of detecting and helping you out with. I'm not a trained psychoanalyst, but believe me, I've read about this stuff a lot. So I will never be a trained psychoanalyst. One of the interesting things about the psychoanalyst, they're still out there, there's still Freudian psychoanalysts out there. And these are the ones we use as stereotypes to, when you see a cartoon with somebody in the psych office and they're laying on the couch and the analyst is sitting behind them with a notepad, that's the Freudians. They're the only ones that do that. None of the rest of us do, but because they were first and they set the method up, they've become the stereotype of what things are like in therapy. I sit in front of you like I would be right now. All the rest of us do that. You know, if I have a couch and I'm bringing in more than one person, great, you'll sit there and I'll sit in a chair. But we just go face to face. So the vast majority of us don't do it like that, but that is all where it started. That's where it came from. Now that analyst is going to be interested in those little occasional slips that come out. They're called Freudian slips, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, or maybe next chapter when we talk about therapies. But what you've got is that there are certain things that, for instance, I really need some better examples of this, but there have been plenty of times where we all have said something that came out wrong. And sometimes it came out a little dirty. You know, you didn't mean it that way, but oh, what happened? Well, that is what they call a Freudian slip. And that Freudian slip, that's a term you will hear. Some of these terms I'm going to give you, yeah, they sound ridiculous. And Jaylene, I got you here. They sound ridiculous, but they are a part of our language now. And so this is, if you haven't heard of these before, it's a good time to learn them. But a Freudian slip is when you say, when something comes out, maybe not quite as you intended it, but sometimes maybe it's a little closer to the truth. So that's a Freudian slip. Now also another clue. No, they don't. Freud was all about sex, and again, I'll definitely be talking more about that as we today. But they don't have to be sexual in nature. However, probably most often they are. But there was something happened to Freud's whole idea that sexual energy drives everything. Okay, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm save that for towards the end. But definitely, Freud was all about sex. Dreams are very important for Freud. You know, when we talked about dreams in the consciousness chapter, we mentioned that Freudian dream of riding on a train with your mother and it goes into a tunnel, and what that would mean for Freud. And I'll just leave it to your imagination, but definitely it was sexual in nature. And it would be even more important to look at it in those Freudian terms in just a second as we talk about some of his theory about our problems with our parents and our caregivers and stuff. Okay. Also accidents for Freud, which means that I've got a whole bunch of these things happening all the time. Anytime you stop in a sentence and say, there's something unconscious going on with you that is messing with your conscious. Your unconscious is messing with your conscious. And we're going to talk about the unconscious in just a moment. But these accidents are another way. These accidents, these Freudian slips and dreams. And the Freudian analyst wants you, they want you to keep a journal by your nightstand. As soon as you wake up from that dream, write down every single detail that you can remember and then bring it to analysis, because that's a big clue to your unconscious. Your unconscious is normally just that. You can't reach it. Okay, it's down there. It's being held down there purposefully by a defense mechanism, which we'll talk about in just a second. Okay. All right. So let's talk about Freud's idea behind the personality structure. And again, we're going to be talking about terms that are used in everyday language. For Freud, there were three parts of it. You're only born with one of them, and that's called the id. Maybe the shortest term you'll have to learn in all of college. It's the id. The id works off what's called the pleasure principle. You're born as nothing but a ball of id. Everything is pleasure. It's all about getting your needs met. And when you're a very tiny infant, there's something to that. Your needs are simple. You need, food and comfort and warmth but you're helpless. You need to be taken care of, right? So, and in the course of being taken care of, your id is at work. You're like looking for pleasure, all right? After a couple of years, I'm just going to give you the ages are not exact, but just to help guide you and keep you in order and remember it. But after a couple of years, you learn that you can't be all id. Every time you stick your hand in the cookie jar, it keeps getting slapped. It's like, well, wait a minute. I've got to figure out how to get these cookies. So what develops, and this is another term you've heard a lot, is called the ego. But this works on the reality principle. Yeah, the original use of the term ego is not how we use it now. We're not talking about somebody full of themselves. We're not talking about being narcissistic. For Freud, the ego was when you develop the ability to kind of look around and say, all right, how am I going to feed my id realistically? I can't just walk in and get a cookie whenever I want. I've got to figure out how to do this. So maybe your ego kicks in by looking at your mom and making your eyes as big as you possibly can and say, Mom, can I please have a cookie? That's the ego at work, trying to get the id what it wants. All right. When you think about how, now the reality principle is conscious, the id is not. The id is buried down there. The reality principle is the ego sometimes is at war with the id because the id wants things that can't be had. You can't just walk over to the ATM machine and just hit a button and have all the money you want come out of there. no matter how much your id would like that. So your reality principle has to figure out ways that at least make you enough money to where you can get what you need. But you know what? That's when your id is mad, okay? The reality principle will be the one that's conscious. The id is the unconscious. Okay, so how are we doing so far with this? We got one more part of this, and this one is called the super ego. And this, kicks in maybe about the time you start in elementary school or so. And again, this according to Freud. And what the superego amounts to is a conscience. I think most of us can agree, not everybody even develops a superego. We see some people out there that really have no conscience, and they can be a problem in society for sure. So, but this conscience kicks in, and this is where a whole lot of your conflict comes in, because you're obviously your id, which has no conscience, it just wants what it wants, is going to be at battle with your superego, and it's up to your ego to balance them out somehow. So your conscience is more conscious than the id is. It usually comes about in the form of your feelings. When you feel guilty about something, according to Freud, that is your super ego, super ego, telling you that, well, what we've got here is you're not supposed to be doing that, son. Let's do something else. And your id's going, no, I want what I want. Your ego's going, okay, wait a minute, I'm going to satisfy these two ends. For Freud, we're always in conflict. The conflict between our conscious and unconscious, and between these three pieces of the personality structure, they're at war. And we're almost never aware of it because it's taking place in the unconscious. So how are you so far in this? It's going to get a lot weirder, okay? The next, I'm going to do a little bit different in the order that this is in the book. They've got defense mechanisms next, and I'm definitely going to talk about those. But I'm now going to go back to chapter 3 to those personality stages as we develop them. I think it's important to keep it all within Freud and not within that third chapter. But I believe that, if I remember right, because I haven't popped the book open in a while. The age ranges, id is pure id about from birth to about 2. The ego develops at about the age of 2, so you're going to have that one from then on, and you've got them all for the rest of your life once they develop. And then the superego kicks in around 6 or 7, something in there. And again, not exact, just to try and help keep you in order and you know, remember that. No, it's called terrible twos just because they're really terrible. They, yeah, they'll, yeah.
But you say that it kicks in at around 2.
Yeah.
Would you say maybe that might have something to do with it?
You know, actually, upon reflection, maybe not, because the terrible twos really refer to the fact that a child usually learns the word no at that point in time. And so they start driving you a little crazy based on that. But actually,
it's a lie. It doesn't end when they're 2.
Yeah, wait till they're teenagers.
Terrible 3s, terrible 4s, terrible 6, terrible everything.
Terrible teens, yeah. And then all of a sudden they become adults and you learn stuff really fast. I can't believe how brilliant you are. You really knew what you were talking about. Yeah, thanks a lot. So, all right. So, but really, when you think about it, the terrible twos it's not really referring to, well, don't roll out of the chair there, Seamus. You get a little too comfortable on the recliner. But it's, yeah, it's going to get a little more interesting, especially right now. So we're going to talk about personality development, stages of personality development. Now, this is where Freud starts sounding real sexual. So if you're squeamish, sorry about that. It kind of goes along with what we have to talk about in this section. And Freud even though so much of it is not accepted by people like me, although there's still, believe it or not, there's a few ideas of his I find useful and do use, but I'm not a Freudian by any stretch. But Freud decided that we're nothing but sexual beings, and that everything that we do is to satisfy a sexual urge, and that begins at birth. Okay, so each of these stages is going to be governed by an erogenous zone, and it's going to move around a little bit. It's not going to be the same from stage to stage. All right. And for Freud, if you don't get through these stages satisfactorily, I'm never sure which word to use here. I've used several over the years, but if you don't satisfy these urges, which after you hear what they're like, it's like, how could you? No wonder we have so many problems. Then we're going to have what he called fixations. And there's another word that's worked its way into our language. You'll hear about people being fixated. You'll hear about this the rest of your life. This is where it came from. It came from Freud. Okay. And these fixations, I'll describe them with each stage as we go through. The first stage, it's called the oral stage. This is, I'll give you ages, but again, it's about, this is just rough. It can vary. So they're not etched in stone. I give you these ages more to help you kind of visualize. And again, visualization being so important. I want you to be able to visualize what the person might be looking at when they're going through this kind of thing. So it's birth to 18 months. And in the oral stage for Freud, you're going to hear me say that a lot. For Freud, this is where the erogenous zone is your mouth. And if you've ever been around little babies, there's a certain amount of, oh yeah, maybe so, because they stick everything in their mouth, right? I mean, they're flexible enough, they stick their feet in their mouth, for crying out loud, which is like, holy cow, try it now and you'll never walk again. So there's, I mean, they just grab everything and they stick it in their mouth. And for Freud, this was sexual in nature. This was deriving sexual pleasure from birth to 18 months or thereabouts. And of course, if you remember, this is about the id. So everything's going to go in your mouth. Now, as caregivers, you have to watch them, right? No, don't put dirt in your mouth. No, don't eat those worms. You know, yada, yada. There's just so many things they can stick in their mouth and will and do. So for Freud, that's what's going on. Now, if you don't satisfactorily make it through this stage, you're going to have certain fixations. And these fixations can include things that happen that you do with your mouth. If you talk too much, what does that say about me? If you talk too much, you're orally fixated. If you're sarcastic, you're orally fixated. If you smoke, if you drink, if you overeat, maybe if you undereat even, all of these represent oral fixations. I guess pretty much anything you do with your mouth, if it's not completely normal, would be considered by Freud to be an oral fixation. Yeah, and as you chew on your pen, you're going, uh-oh. I used to do that in high school. I'd chew up the end of my Bics. The little tabs would come out. I was bored. So that's the oral stage. It's going to get worse. You thought, how could it get worse? Oh, wait till you see the next stage. And the next stage will go from about, 18 months, 3 years. But that can vary a bit too. It's called the anal stage. Yes. For Freud, the erogenous zone moves to that famous planet Uranus. Okay, that's where it goes. Can't believe I said that. A lot of this centers around your toilet training. And toilet training can go 3 ways. 1, you can get through it without problems. 2, you can kind of refuse to get trained in two different ways. So this goes to 2A and 2B. One, you can refuse to cooperate by holding everything in, by refusing to defecate. The other is that you just keep on defecating in your diapers as much as you want and whenever you want, and you resist in that particular way. So this is, for Freud, again, sexually erogenous, and we have fixations, as you might imagine. And I'm sure you've heard before now, and you will, I guarantee you again, the term anal fixation. And there's two types of that. You have anal retentive, which is the one you're more likely to hear referred to. I've even seen Saturday Night Live do skits around being anal retentive. And the other one is anal explosive or expulsive. And both those fixations refer to the two types of withholding training that I just mentioned. One, the anal retentives basically refuse to defecate whenever possible. The anal expulsives will be the ones that, they just keep pooping, just filling their diapers whenever and wherever. They're sitting on the pot doesn't make any difference to them. So it's just, I'm going to go when I want to go. Now, the anal retentive person is the one that tends to be really, really neat and orderly. They just they're almost obsessive compulsive. In fact, they could be obsessive compulsive, where they have certain behaviors that you have to keep everything right and neat and orderly and in a certain manner. It would be like if you were preparing something for vegetable soup. So you cut all the onions, and all the onions have to be perfectly little squares, and you line them up on the cutting board just exactly right. Now it's time for the peppers, and you do the same thing with them and line them up neatly. Yeah, you get the picture. That's what anal retentive looks like. The other thing, the anal expulsive would be the kind of person who keeps a desk like I do. I'm not going to put my camera on it, but what's funny is I like to cook. I'm in the kitchen and I do keep things neat and clean in there. And then you come in, you look at my desk and you go, you can't be the person that's doing the kitchen that way too. So apparently I have both fixations according to Freud. So that's, yeah, but those terms, especially the anal retentive, that one's in common use throughout the world, really. Freud's reputation really has spread far and wide. And that's another reason you got to learn about Freud, because his stuff is out there. So in more than one way. Okay, so that's anal. Well, now we got to move that erogenous zone. And it's going to be kind of interestingly named if you're a female. And this will go from about the age of 3 to, let's call it 6 or 7. And this is the phallic stage. It's kind of interesting that he named it that, since he derived this whole theory from his case studies of about 30 women. But at this point in time, and this is, I guess for Freud, this is really the biggie for developing personality, because some really strange things are going to happen here. Okay. How many of you in high school got to study Oedipus Rex? Anybody see that? Yeah, well, we're going to have something named after that. It's called the Oedipus complex. And the reason that Freud came up with this commonly used term now is that what this represents is, and he's talking about little boys here. He's talking about that little boys at about the age of 3 or so would start lusting after their mothers. They wanted to sexually couple with their mothers at this age. And, that's usually not going to happen. And this was, as bad as it sounds now, think about how shocking this was in Victorian era Europe. I mean, this kind of, women didn't even show ankles in those days. That was considered, a pole dancer might show an ankle only in those days. That's how very uptight and upright that they were. And so he's talking about like young boys lusting after their mothers. And, because that couldn't really happen, because in this, again, Freud's theory is that dad would be there. And because dad would be there, you'd come to realize that, whoa, I can't compete with dad. He's bigger, he's stronger, he's faster. There's no way I can compete with him. So what you do as a little boy at that point in time is you learn to identify with your father. And you will start to imitate him. And this is where you learn your male-oriented behaviors. And so for a normal male, they have to get through this stage of being in lust with their mothers, and then realizing, no, it won't happen. And then they say, okay, well, I'm going to be like dad now. And then you switch over to that completely. Somehow by the age of 6 or 7, you're that far along. How's that sound? How do I keep a straight face talking about this? Now, he did not talk about women as much in this regard, but he did come up with a female side of this particular period of time. And he has an added twist, which y'all are just going to love, okay? But for females, it's called the Electra complex. Again, based on a Greek tragedy with almost the same theme, only from the reverse sex side. But the Electra complex is what he called it for females. And in this particular case, little girls about the age of 3 want to be with their fathers sexually. And supposedly the same pattern happens where they will realize, no, we can't do that. I've got to be more like mom. And so I'm going to develop female behaviors. And of course, back in those days, you had things much more stereotypical where, there was a male supremacy, women were submissive, they didn't work and things like that. So it was a different world in those days. But there's another twist to this that he added on, which I just know y'all are going to love. Freud said that little girls realized if their dad had something that they didn't have and they wanted one. Freud named this penis envy. You had no idea before today that you actually wanted a penis, did you? So, and I guess if you're trans, that would be the case. But I don't know how many trans knew at 3 that they were trans. So, I'm not making fun of trans. I'm just kind of thinking how absurd some of this stuff really is. But this is what, ladies, sorry, but this is what Freud said. This is according to Freud, okay? Don't blame the messenger. But yeah, that's where he said. Now, of course, if you do have fixations in this particular stage, they can take all sorts of forms, as you might imagine. And like I said before, this is probably the most important stage for your personality development. And what happens at about the age of 6 or 7, all of these conflicts become unconscious. I mean, you can remember stuff from your childhood back then, but these conflicts that happen because of that get buried, all right? You're going to move into the 4th stage, which is called the latent stage. That starts about the age of 6 or 7. For Freud, it was when you started elementary school, because at that point in time, you're going to go to school. You're going to learn about how to basically function in society. School is as much for that as it is for education. It's like, how do I become a good little citizen and learn stuff and behave in group settings and all. And for Freud, all this sexual stuff got buried. This is not for him one of these sexually active stages. That part becomes unconscious, that you're not aware of it. And then about the time you hit puberty, you move into what he called the genital stage. And this is supposed to be the stage where you have mature sexual function. And for Freud, and this held sway in my profession until about 1980 or so, as a reason for many bad laws, is that the only mature and normal sexual functioning is heterosexual. Homosexual is considered a bad fixation left over from that phallic stage. Things did not get handled correctly at that point in time. They actually had it, homosexuality, until the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 3rd edition came out. They took it out as any kind of mental illness, if you will, at that point in time. But a lot of bad laws and a lot of bad things happened because of Freud's theory about that. So anyway, that's what happens when you hit the genital stage. Now, for Freud, all of this stuff that happened up to the age of 7 is buried in your unconscious. Your unconscious is about 90% of you. Your conscious is only about 10% of you. So all the things you're doing right now, maybe that's another way that whole 10% of your brain is all you use. Maybe that's another part where that myth came from. Not true. We use it all. Yeah, Freud had an interesting influence even on people who rejected him completely. But some of these, again, a lot of these terms, they're out there in the world. We use them all the time. And on that happy note, it's 8:30. Any questions? I just looked at the clock. I get to talk about this stuff and I have fun with it. So we'll pick it back up on Monday. Is that something to look forward to or what? Yeah, huh? Everybody go out there and buy you a book. The Interpretation of Dreams. That was his big literary work. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Y'all have a good, safe weekend. I want to see everybody back on Monday, except for you poor husbandry people. But I know that you
Have a
won't
good
be.
weekend, Mr. Fahey.
Y'all take care. Thanks for dropping by.
Mr. Fahey,
Yes, ma'am.
did you end up getting me this in the beginning of the class?
I'm sorry.
Did you end up marking me down at the beginning of class?
I saw that your name popped up on, I'll double check to confirm, but there you are. Yeah, I got you. You got credit.
Thank you. Have a
You're
good
welcome.
day.
You too.
I wanted to talk to you privately.
Okay.